The ocean spread out before Clara, vast and indifferent, its surface rippling like molten glass under the waning sun. She stood at the edge of the dock, her boots sinking slightly into the damp wood. The salt wind tugged at her auburn hair, and for a moment, she felt the peculiar weightlessness of anticipation. The ship she'd been waiting for loomed in the distance, a jagged shadow against the horizon. "Are you sure about this?" a voice asked behind her. Clara turned to see Warren, his broad shoulders taut beneath his threadbare coat. His face, weathered by years of hard labor, was drawn into an expression she could only describe as concern, not fear. Warren didn't scare easily. "I've never been sure of anything," Clara replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "You read the same report I did. If he's on board, this could change everything." Warren grunted, crossing his arms. "It's not him I'm worried about. It's the others. You know what people say about these mercenary crews? Desperate men, Clara. Dangerous men." She met his gaze, her green eyes sharp. "Desperate men are the ones who get things done. Besides, we don't have a choice. If we wait for the council's approval, we'll lose the trail." Warren sighed, but before he could argue further, the ship docked with a jarring creak. The gangplank lowered, and the crew disembarked, a motley collection of faces hardened by lives lived on the edge. Clara scanned them quickly, her heart pounding. Then she saw him. He was taller than she'd imagined, his lean frame moving with a predator's grace. His black coat billowed as he stepped onto the dock, and his dark hair fell in careless waves over sharp, angular features. But it was his eyes that held her attention, piercing and cold like shards of obsidian. This was Elias Drake, the infamous hunter, the man who had been a shadow in every story she'd ever heard about the vanished colonies. "Miss Halstead," he said, his voice low and smooth, as though her name was a secret he had uncovered. "You've been looking for me." Clara straightened, refusing to let the weight of his presence unnerve her. "That depends. Are you as good as they say you are?" A faint smile ghosted his lips. "Better." Warren shifted beside her, his unease palpable, but Clara didn't take her eyes off Elias. She extended a hand. "Then we have a deal." Elias regarded her for a long moment before clasping her hand. His grip was firm, his skin cool. "Let's hope you're ready for what that entails." The exchange was brief, but it felt like a spark igniting dry tinder. The deal was struck, and there was no turning back. The sun dipped lower as the three of them walked toward the inn at the edge of the port town. Clara filled Elias in on the details, her voice brisk and precise. She outlined the reports of the disappearances, the cryptic symbols carved into the abandoned machinery, and the rumors of something that wasn't entirely human. Elias listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. "And you think the colonies were targeted because of this?" he asked finally, his tone measured. "I don't think," Clara replied. "I know. The council's too scared to admit it, but these aren't random acts. Someone, or something, is orchestrating this, and if we don't act fast, there won't be anything left to salvage." Elias stopped abruptly, turning to face her. "Do you have any idea what you're getting into?" Her jaw tightened. "Do you?" He smiled, then a sharp, humorless thing. "Oh, I've got a pretty good idea." Before she could respond, a figure emerged from the shadows of the alleyway they were passing. The man was wiry, his face etched with desperation. A blade glinted in his hand. "Your purse," the man barked, his voice ragged. "Now!" Warren moved instinctively, stepping in front of Clara, but Elias was faster. In a blur of motion, he had the man disarmed and pinned against the wall, the blade now in his own hand. "Wrong target," Elias said quietly, his voice a blade in itself. "Go." The man nodded frantically, and Elias released him. He fled without looking back. Elias turned back to Clara, slipping the knife into his coat. "Desperate men," he said, echoing Warren's earlier words. "Dangerous men." Warren scowled, but Clara's gaze didn't waver. "And yet you didn't kill him." Elias shrugged. "Waste of time." They reached the inn moments later, a dimly lit, cramped space that smelled of stale ale and damp wood. Elias took a seat in the far corner, and Clara slid into the chair across from him. Warren hovered nearby, his eyes scanning the room like a restless watchdog. "So," Elias said, leaning back, "what's your plan?" Clara hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "We track the artifact to its last known location. We find out who's using it and why. And then we stop them." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Just like that, huh?" "Just like that," she said firmly. He chuckled, a sound that was neither warm nor cruel, but something in between. "You got guts. I'll give you that." Clara leaned forward, her voice low but fierce. "This isn't about guts. It's about survival. If we don't stop this, it won't just be the colonies. It'll be every settlement from here to the capital." For the first time, something flickered in Elias's expression, an emotion she couldn't quite name. Respect? Curiosity? It was gone as quickly as it appeared. "All right, Halstead," he said. "I'll take the job. But you should know something." "What's that?" "Once you start down this path, there's no going back." She met his gaze, her resolve unshaken. "Good. I wasn't planning to." The door slammed open, and a gust of cold air swept through the room. Clara turned to see a messenger, his face pale and drawn, stumbling inside. "They've attacked another settlement," he gasped. "This time, they left survivors." "Barely." Elias stood, his coat sweeping behind him like a shadow. "Looks like we've got our first lead." Clara followed him out into the night, her heart pounding. The hunt had begun. Title: Bound by Threads. The bus rattled to a stop outside the towering brick structure of Jefferson High. Robbie adjusted the straps of his worn-out backpack, ignoring the curious glances from his fellow passengers. He had grown used to the stares, to the whispered speculations about the boy with the unpronounceable name who always carried a tin lunchbox smelling of spices. He stepped off the bus, the December wind biting through his thin jacket. The faint strains of the morning bell carried across the frosty air. Inside the school's bustling hallways, he wove carefully through the crowd, clutching his books tightly. His first semester in this American high school had taught him that bumping into the wrong person could spell disaster. He avoided eye contact, instead focusing on the scuffed tiles beneath his sneakers. "Hey, new kids!" Robbie froze, the voice sharp and laced with amusement. He turned slowly to find himself face-to-face with Caleb, a wiry blonde senior known for his sharp tongue and sharper fists. Flanking him were two boys, their laughter already mocking. "Where'd you get that shirt?" Caleb smirked, gesturing at Robbie's corda, its vibrant blue embroidered with gold. "Looks like you're going to a wedding." A flicker of heat rose in Robbie's cheeks. "It's traditional," he mumbled, his accent thick around the edges of the word. "Yeah, well, this isn't India," Caleb shot back. "Try fitting in for once." Robbie's shoulders tensed, but he said nothing. Caleb's taunts followed him down the hallway, louder and crueler with every step. He ducked into his first period classroom, relief washing over him as the door clicked shut behind him. On the other side of the school, Zoe leaned against the art room's supply cabinet, her paint-streaked hands cradling a cup of lukewarm coffee. She scanned her latest canvas, a vivid explosion of colors meant to evoke a sense of displacement. But the emotion felt hollow, contrived. She sighed, setting the coffee aside. Her gaze shifted to the wall of student work, where a flyer for the upcoming cultural showcase was pinned. "Share your world," it read in bold letters. Zoe rolled her eyes. Jefferson High's attempt at multicultural unity always felt more performative than sincere. "You're scowling again," her friend Mia teased from the corner, where she was sketching the outline of a mural. Zoe shrugged, just thinking about how this place pretends to care about diversity, but nothing really changes. "It's all for show." Mia raised an eyebrow. "So, what are you going to do about it?" The question lingered as Zoe gathered her brushes and headed to her next class. She'd always been vocal about injustice, but never found the right way to channel her frustration. Maybe this year she thought could be different. By lunchtime, Robbie found his usual spot beneath the stairs in the far corner of the cafeteria. It wasn't much, but it was quiet. A small reprieve from the cacophony of overlapping conversations and trays clattering on tables. He unlatched his lunchbox, the aroma of masala and fresh naan wafting into the air. "Smells amazing." Robbie looked up, startled. A girl with bright red hair and paint smudges on her hands stood before him. She didn't wait for an invitation, plopping down across from him with a curious grin. "I'm Zoe," she said. "You're Ravi, right?" He nodded cautiously. "How do you know?" "Small school. Plus, I saw your name on the sign-up sheet for the cultural showcase," Zoe replied, pulling out an apple. "Are you performing?" Showing how to make kolam," Ravi said, his voice barely audible. At her blank expression, he added, "It's a traditional art made with rice powder. Designs on the ground." "Cool," Zoe said, genuinely intrigued. "I'm doing a mural for it. Kind of ironic, considering how this school handles cultural appreciation." Ravi tilted his head. "What do you mean?" Zoe leaned closer, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "It's like they want us to put our cultures on display, but only in neat little boxes that don't disrupt their idea of normal. It's performative." Ravi considered this. Back home, culture was a living, breathing part of everyday life. Here, it felt like something he had to shrink down, make palatable. Before he could respond, Caleb's voice sliced through the air. "Well, it looks like the art freak and the foreigner are bonding." Zoe's eyes narrowed. "Get lost, Caleb." Caleb sneered. "Just saying, maybe you can teach him how to fit in." Ravi stared at his lunchbox, his appetite evaporating. But Zoe wasn't done. "You're just mad because the only thing you're good at is being a jerk," she shot back. Caleb's smirk faltered, but he walked away without another word. "Don't let him get to you," Zoe said once he was gone. "He's all bark, no bite." Ravi offered a small, grateful smile. "Thank you." Over the next week, Zoe and Ravi found themselves thrown together more often, their projects for the cultural showcase overlapping in unexpected ways. Ravi showed Zoe the intricate patterns of kolam, his hands steady and deliberate as he guided the rice powder. In turn, Zoe invited Ravi to the art room, where she worked on her mural, a chaotic, beautiful tapestry of interconnected cultures. As they spent more time together, their initial awkwardness melted away. Zoe marveled at Ravi's precision and patience, while Ravi found himself drawn to Zoe's fierce energy and unfiltered honesty. They traded stories. Ravi spoke of monsoon rains and family festivals, Zoe of protests and art exhibits. But their growing friendship wasn't without its challenges. One afternoon, as Zoe painted a section of her mural, Ravi noticed she had depicted a kolam pattern alongside a generic image of a hennaed hand. "That's not right," he said hesitantly. Zoe frowned. "What do you mean?" "The henna and kolam. They're from different parts of India. They don't really go together like that," Ravi explained, his tone careful. Zoe's brush hovered in midair. "I didn't think it mattered. It's all Indian, right?" Ravi's stomach nodded. "It's more complicated than that." Their conversation ended in awkward silence. And for the first time, Ravi wondered if Zoe's passion for cultural justice was more surface level than she realized. The night of the cultural showcase arrived with the gymnasium transformed into a kaleidoscope of colors, smells, and sounds. Students milled about, sampling food, watching performances, and admiring displays. Ravi's kolam station drew a modest crowd, his careful hands recreating intricate designs on the floor. He heard murmurs of admiration, but also caught snippets of dismissive comments. "Isn't it just chalk?" one student said. Nearby, Zoe unveiled her mural. It was bold, vibrant, and undeniably beautiful, but Ravi's earlier observation lingered in his mind. When the event coordinator praised it as a perfect representation of Indian culture, Ravi's stomach churned. Later, as the crowd thinned, Zoe approached him. "Hey," she said softly. "I've been thinking about what you said." Together, they knelt on the floor, adding new patterns to the mural. This time, every line and curve carried meaning, a story shared rather than imposed. For the first time, Ravi felt a sense of belonging, not because he had conformed, but because he had been understood. And as the night wore on, the line between teacher and student blurred, their collaboration becoming a bridge between two worlds, imperfect yet full of promise. Here's a narrative piece titled Love and New Beginnings. The town of Windmere sat snug between rolling hills and a dense forest, its cobblestone streets whispering tales of generations past. It was here, beneath a sky splashed with early spring's pale blues and golds, that Leona Gresham returned after 7 years of absence. A long journey from the bustling cities where ambition had stolen her heart brought her back to the sleepy village she once called home. She stepped off the creaking carriage, her leather boots crunching on the gravel, a suitcase clutched in her hand. Her chestnut hair, streaked with the faintest traces of silver, framed a face both familiar and changed, determined but haunted. Windermere hadn't changed much. The bakery still wafted the scent of cinnamon and yeast through the town square. The smithy rang with the rhythmic clang of hammer against metal. Yet as Leona looked around, she noticed the absence of something, or someone. Elijah Hawthorne. The thought of him hit her like the sudden chill of a late frost. 7 years ago, she had left Windermere not because of him, but certainly without him. He had asked her to stay, his hands trembling as he held hers beneath the ancient oak tree that marked the village edge. "This is our place, Leona," he had said, his deep voice faltering. "But only if you want it to be." She had wanted more than the village could give, more than Elijah could offer then. Or so she thought. "Miss Gresham," a voice interrupted her thoughts. It belonged to an elderly man, dressed in the familiar garb of the town's innkeeper, Mr. Horace Whitlock. He squinted at her through spectacles perched precariously on the bridge of his nose. "Mr. Whitlock," Leona greeted, forcing a smile. "It's been a long time." "It has," he said with a nod, then leaned closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "I imagine you'll find Windermere quieter than you left it. A lot's happened." Leona didn't press for details. She simply nodded, handed him a few coins for her stay, and headed toward the inn, her footsteps heavy on the worn path. She'd learned what she needed to know soon enough. The following morning, Leona ventured into the heart of the village, her senses overwhelmed by the familiarity of it all. Yet, beneath the surface lay subtle shifts. Faces she once knew were now etched with lines of age, while others were missing altogether. The Hawthorne family's farm, once bursting with life, stood eerily still at the edge of town. Windows were shuttered. The barn, once painted a brilliant red, had faded into muted rust. Leona hesitated before the gate, her fingers brushing against the peeling wood. "It's abandoned," said a voice behind her, startling her. She turned to see Mara Greaves, her childhood friend, standing there with arms crossed. Her once fiery red hair was now streaked with white, but her sharp green eyes remained as piercing as ever. "Mara," Leona said, her voice trembling. "What happened?" Mara tilted her head, studying her. "You don't know?" Leona shook her head. "I just arrived. Elijah left," Mara said bluntly. "Almost 3 years ago, after his parents passed, he couldn't bear to stay. Packed what little he had and disappeared. No one's heard from him since." The weight of Mara's words settled heavily on Leona's chest. Elijah was gone, truly gone, and it was because of her. She had left him here to bear the weight of loss and responsibility alone. What had she expected? That he'd wait forever? As Leona lingered by the gate, a boy no older than 12 approached, clutching a satchel stuffed with letters. "Miss Gresham," he called, his voice thin and nervous. "Yes." "This was left for you," he said, handing her an envelope before darting off without another word. Leona stared at the envelope. Her name was written in a familiar, slanted hand. Elijah's. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, revealing a single page. "Leona, if you've returned, I can only hope it's because you've found what you were searching for. I've learned that sometimes love isn't about staying. It's about letting go. I hope Windermere still feels like home for you, even if I no longer do. Elijah." Her knees threatened to give way, but she steadied herself against the fence. The letter was dated 2 years ago. Wherever Elijah was now, he hadn't waited for her return. And why should he? She had made her choice. But beneath the guilt and sorrow, a spark ignited, a determination she hadn't felt in years. Elijah might be gone, but she hadn't come back to Windermere just to mourn her mistakes. The letter was a thread, and she intended to follow it. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her coat pocket. When she turned back toward the village, Mara was watching her with a mix of curiosity and pity. "What are you going to do now?" Mara asked. "Find him," Leona replied, her voice firm. "If he's willing, I want a chance to make things right." Mara's lips quirked into a faint smile. "You always were the stubborn one." The next morning, Leona prepared for the journey ahead, gathering supplies and asking questions of anyone who might have seen or heard of Elijah in the years since he left. Clues were sparse. Rumors of a man fitting his description working in a lumber mill near the northern border of the forest. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As she left Windmere, the morning sun bathed the hills in gold, and the familiar ache of the unknown filled her chest. This time, though, it was not fear but hope. For the first time in years, Leona felt she was moving towards something rather than away. And perhaps, just perhaps, Elijah was moving toward her too. This section introduces Leona and Elijah as the main characters, establishes their past relationship and the central conflict, Leona's departure and its impact, and sets up the quest for reconciliation. The ending leaves room for continuation, encouraging readers to follow Leona on her journey.